So Lorne, this is not the very first Industrial Light and Magic model shop.
No, Van Nuys, California, down in L.A., north part of L.A., was the first one. In fact, when we did it, who knows that we were ever going to do another film? I didn't think so.
I'm curious about the genesis. It feels like so much important spaceship aesthetic came out of the early days of ILM. And I'm curious about the creative process that led to that worked-in used universe.
The word used universe came pretty directly from George.
Really?
I think the boilerplate technology came from within the model shop.
The term boilerplate.
Yeah, boilerplate technology. And I know we looked at Colin Cantwell's models. They were in John Dexter's office. And, quite frankly, they were neat, but they weren't, we just knew it wasn't what we wanted.
Yeah.
And, of course, credit to Joe, he just produced incredible amounts of drawings and sketches.
Yeah.
Not like drafting drawings, but just, sometimes you'd be in a pinch, not a pinch, but Grant would say, we have to have the escape pod. We have to shoot it next week, all this stuff. And you say, well, go up and talk to, what do you want? Go up and talk to Joe, we'll give you a sketch, And it was like, come back in 15 minutes, And,
wow.
And he would come up with something. I just, cleaning out the basement, I came across recently the original drawing of the fencing droid. It was just a pencil drawing that Joe had done, and again in 15 minutes, and said, because we were just, you know what it was very shortly after I got there, because there was drawings were done, draftings were done a couple of times by Steve Gawley. Mm-hmm. And when I arrived, we did the super glue. I brought the super glue thing, which changed the speed of everything. And all of a sudden, I think Joe realized that, oh my God, we just can totally dispense with this other middle step
of drafting.
Drafting anything. We just go directly to the model.
And that was because you guys were also really facile at taking a rough sketch or a rough shape idea and turning it into something that felt substantive.
Yeah, doing it from a drafting is kind of, it's like measure this and measure that and that kind of thing. In some ways, I don't know exactly what the magic sauce was, but when I arrived, I must have done something that Grant, who was the head of the model shop then, I just don't remember exactly what it was I'd done, but he then said, okay, you do the whole rear end of the Millennium Falcon. The mandala with the engines and all that kind of stuff. And then the two little channelways and the ends, that kind of thing too. So
how thrilling.
Yeah. Really.
One of the things my friends told me, reported back to me when I was working at ILM, was that I prefaced when I would say what I was doing tomorrow, I would say, tomorrow I get to. Yeah. Tomorrow I get to make it. Yeah. Did you feel like that back then?
I did, because I felt, God, I really had Grant's confidence, because the same kind of thing happened with the Sandcrawler. He had done all the plywood in all these strange angles, it's very strange angles. And believe it or not, in a drawer at my house, I have the picture of a German tank motorcycle that just has two sets of tracks, mm-hmm. and a guy sits in it. It's like, and at a certain angle on the cover, it is the Sandcrawler.
Wow!
And since it was one of the model kits that we had, I would imagine Joe snatched it and went, yeah, that's it.
Incredible.
But anyway, Grant came to me after I did the mandala and we finished the big Millennium Falcon. He had done the wood of the Sandcrawler, and then he said, just do the whole back end on that top section where the engine is, So it was like I didn't even do it with anybody else,
Wow.
It was you do that and I do this. So that with the Hawker Harrier engines and, also a real godsend was the Formula One cars at the time.
You mean the model kits of Formula One cars?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, because we had them in two different scales, all the suspension pieces, they were beautifully made, and I would go to the boxes and get 2 of these, or 4 of those, or 8 of those, or 16 of these, snap them all off. It was always matching 1, 2, 4,
Well, and in subsequent movies, you guys had to make several things. I remember there's like multiple model kits that were used for the 5-foot Falcon that then you guys used smaller versions of for the 3-foot Falcon.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't that lucky.
That was really good that Porsche made that transmission in the two correct sizes.
It was. And also it amazes me that I used the larger scale somehow automatically.
Right.
That seemed to fit the size of the model better rather than, littler pieces. And then when I think Fulmer and Steve made the 2-footer, I was like, oh Lord, they just had this, that, and it really was a dream, like you said.
Now, whenever anyone's talking about the history of model making of spaceships, they bring up that like the kit bashing that you guys were doing in the late 70s was very similar to what the team was doing on 2001 to make the ships, and also Silent Running.
Yeah,
and there's some other precursors. Were you guys? I mean, did you have some people who had worked on those productions with you? Were you guys cognizant that this had been territory that had been trod before? Or that
there was a guy named Dick Alexander, and he'd worked on a machinist, not a model maker, a machinist. So he had a few things, and he had stills, or at least there was somebody provided stills.
Right.
And
so you could see some things in progress.
Yeah, and we saw, no, they weren't so much in progress. They were frame grabs, probably. Okay. But looked at them, and here's what I thought about it. It had all of these neat things, and when that ship was moving, it worked. But the problem that it didn't have is what I call interconnectedness. Mm-hmm. It just wasn't, if this was supposedly a plenum box that was near the carburetors, it had to have some kind of a physical connection, like a pipe, a tube, a wire, that kind of thing. So we got to play with that stuff, and we didn't have a production manager that didn't say, guys, that interconnectedness crap that you're talking about, is not worth anything. No one will ever look at these models stills and lust over them in museums.
But they will.
So.
Was George, I know George has said that the ships were inspired by the car culture of his youth in Fresno.
Yeah.
I'm curious if he was verbal with you guys about that, talking about car modding culture.
A little bit.
Yeah.
George is kind of short with words, and he's kind of, I wouldn't exactly call it shy. He doesn't put himself out there all the time. And I, believe it or not, I would work late in the model shop because I really got the bit in my mouth, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm working late, and this guy comes in, real thick hair and a beard and all this stuff and dark. And I knew that if he got in the building, he had to be official somehow, or a friend of somebody that he should be there,
You didn't know who he was?
He didn't, And so I explained to him, it said good guys and bad guys. These are the good guys, and the bad guys are in these more round ships and blah, 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 and without telling him story points or anything like kind of stuff. And he would go, oh, interesting. Oh, yeah. And so he came twice like that late at night. And I talked to him a little bit, But then we had a screening in the morning of dailies, and he was there, sitting on the couch. And I noticed that the questions were going to him, and then answers were coming back, and I went, oh, that's the director. Because I knew American Graffiti, but I'd never seen a picture of him before,
That's hilarious.
So
we talked about it in another portion of this, but I'd love to cover it here as well, simply because I just love the setting of this beautiful room. You are responsible for cyanoacrylate, aka crazy glue, in the film industry.
I am. Yeah, I started. Of course, you've probably heard the story before, but I was originally hired for 2 weeks to do a kind of an undesirable job on the Death Star, meaning you had to crawl around on your knees 8 or 10 hours a day, putting on little windows, the little retroreflective windows. So, other people didn't want to do it, so they thought, okay, these two new guys. Well, very quickly, I realized I saw them the way they were doing it, and they would mix up 5-minute epoxy, take a model part, put it on, and then put a masking tape over it. Then the epoxy would still be good. They'd make another part, another tape, and then the epoxy would start to stiffen up, and then
Oh my God, everything was 5-minute epoxy.
Yeah, 5-minute epoxy.
I can't even imagine building a single model that way.
No. So what I did was the next morning, well, first of all, a partner and I named John Erlin had access to commercial grade cyanoacrylates glue. Because it wasn't sold retail yet.
Right.
It was within...
Crazy glue didn't exist at this point.
Within months, or it seemed like it was sold retail.
Okay.
So it somehow hit right at that moment.
Right.
And so I brought a bottle of Eastman 910 in.
It was made by Eastman Kodak.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I went to the table. I said, everybody watch this. I took a Ticonderoga pencil, stuck it 3/4 of the way over the edge of the table, put one drop in and moved my hand away. And the pencil stayed there, cantilevered, and everybody went, "Whoa, how'd you do that?" You know, it was like, yeah. So you're right. It changed everything.
I can imagine.
Changed the speed of everything. So that was probably one of the. That wasn't an aesthetic thing that I did. It was a commercial product and an industrial process. Yeah. And since I'd worked in industrial design, I knew different processes and things pretty well that a lot of the guys didn't.
Excellent. And so you were bringing multiple technologies into the model shop then.
You know, another one like that was I was telling the production manager, I was assigned, since I was kind of onto the Sandcrawler, the tracks. Mm-hmm. So I had to make a pattern for the tracks out of aluminum. And so then I calculated how many I needed, and it was like 280 tracks or something, like 200 tracks.
Yeah.
And so then I was doing, I'd take a mold, that'd make one, and I'd use two, and then, more and more. And so I figured, okay, I'd have a bank of molds, maybe 16 of them, and I'll do 16 at a time. It's still time consuming. So I said to the production manager, I said, God, if I had one of those small injection molding machines, I could do this in no time. He said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I was at an industrial supply company, and they had this tabletop injection molder, and you can make molds for it, and And he said, how much do they cost, do you think? I said, well, the one that I was looking at was about almost $1,500. He said, go get the truck and get a check and go get it.
Wow.
So those kind of things, it's like they didn't think of doing it.
Right.
They didn't have the background to think of doing it. So to do it this way, and John changed the mold making technology quite a bit. He had John, my partner, business partner. We had a small starving shop on our own and double garage, that kind of a thing.
And so you guys were machining your own tooling for the injection molding machine.
What we did, they weren't machined because the tracks needed to be a little weathered. They weren't like crispy, And they went over the top of the metal ones of the Tamiya kit. They snapped onto the top of there with a little bit of glue. So I did them by hand, the little track like that. And so once we had that, we then, I knew all from working at a place called Industrial Design Affiliates, what we would do is there was an aluminum-filled epoxy. It was like a load, really heavy, just packed with aluminum powder. And that would help to dissipate the heat of injection molding. So we would do an epoxy mold, and then you could inject into it. And you could do it for hundreds of times. You couldn't do it for tens of thousands of times. Right. It would break down.
I didn't know that injection molding was part of the early shop's possibilities.
The biggest, I think, one we did, I think John wanted to test the limits of our system. And the upper top of the clamshell of the Y-Wings cockpit is all one piece.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, the actual covering of the
windows,
cockpit.
The openings for the windows, the upper
I replicated part. One of those for Galoob. That is a pain in the ass of a part to make.
I know. And you have to do a lot of filleting from the back and all that stuff.
It's super delicate.
Yeah.
I'm curious in the recapitulation of what you built over the years here, if there are ships or things that you built that just fill you with a warm memory of having worked on that production, or you're super proud of the work that you did on that piece.
Yeah. When people ask that kind of thing, I think it's when something is achieved, when the idea is just golden, and it's achieved within the period of time. Some some tragedy happened in which a second shot can never be done.
Right.
And you go off to somewhere else, and everybody is just like, wow, that satisfaction.
Yeah.
And that was on a film that wasn't. It wasn't a big, great film. Wild Wild West. The chemistry was not good between the characters.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was working on, I think, the pod race arena, and got a call and said, "Can you come over here and take a look at these drawings and all this stuff?" And for what would you break off from Wild Wild West to do Monument Valley? And a collapse of Monument Valley.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, yeah, I guess I can, for a short period of time, if I can hire the crew I want to, and I needed to hire a manager because I had to do both. I had to go back to pod race arena also. So Pete Ranzani was the guy I hired. He's an industrial designer who had worked on a lot of the helmets and all that stuff. But I said, because he already had his industrial design business to do, and I wanted him to be the manager of the crew and all that stuff. And he said, well, as long as I can work with my phone, no one knows that I'm in the middle of San Rafael outside.
Wow.
So he kept, and but anyway, the difficulty was, it was near the end of fall. It was in September, end of September. And it almost always starts to rain in Marin County. At least it used to at the end of October.
Yeah.
Almost always.
Yeah.
But then the other really big problem is I knew from Hollywood rocks, cowboy movies where they'd throw a rock at the cowboy on his horse and it would go, and he'd fall off the horse. And you'd think, it'd be lucky if he was just brain damaged, with a rock this big.
Yeah.
He'd be really lucky. But he got up and, shot his guns and all that stuff. So I thought, there's the big problem right there is even if it's a monument in Monument Valley that's 10 or 8 feet tall, it's made of, I had them cut in logical sections to fall apart. And it had like a ram that went down the center, a hydraulic ram.
It pulls out support.
It not only pulls out support, but it's like a cork in a wine bottle. So when it pulls down, it
pushes it out.
It just pushes it out. Yeah,
amazing.
And all the pieces were put together. What we did is I had the machine shop make me a giant caulking gun, a giant caulking gun, and we mixed walnut shells with alcohol. And walnut shells with alcohol is a little bit like, you take a little bit of spittle and dirt and you can make these little balls,
Yeah.
And they kind of stick together. But if you leave them in the sun, the liquid, but they still kind of hold together until you touch it, and then it falls apart. So I figured, the alcohol will evaporate quickly, and the walnut shells will still have a bit of adhesion from all the dust and everything around them. So we had this big, big gun, and we'd hold the rocks kind of together and then shoot this as mortar in between. And since the walnut shells were the same color as Monument Valley, that same kind of ochre color, it worked. And then you had a certain amount of time to let the alcohol dry. But again, back to the really problem is, how do you make non-real rocks not bounce? Because big rocks just kind of impel themselves into the earth. And yes, you can't necessarily see it. There is a little bit of reverb, there has to be a little bit of reverb, but it isn't perceptible to us when it's like things in Monument Valley that fall. They just go, whoa, So I came up with the idea, I thought, beanbags, or
don't bounce.
Don't bounce like that. And then from that, then I came up with the idea of some Nalgene plastic bottles. Comes in all these different sizes, big, small. And so big rocks got little Nalgene bottles in it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We had a big boring tool that, like a spade bit that we made. And so you'd, like that. And then it had a little key number like that, and it was then disguised with foam. But eventually that led to motor oil with lead shot. So the rocks, the inertia would kind of suspend the lead shot in the oil, as it's heading down like this, and then when it hit the surface, they would condense in the oil, but the force would still be down rather than bouncing back up. So, not that anybody, our people noticed, the guys that were doing it, but it isn't like after it was all done, everybody said, wow, that was great. How'd you keep the rocks from bouncing?
Right. No, it's just, but it's the antithesis of that dam breaking in Superman, where the water droplets are like this big, jumping around through frame.
Well, what happened is we set it up, and lo and behold, the wind is those few days is starting to pick up at the end of October, and sometimes we would have it all set up to do a test, and the wind would just, the spittle there wasn't enough in the walnut shells. So it was like, ooh, this is a hard one. And so we set it up this one day. I took a big fishing pole, a poke pole, and hung a piece of down on a cord. And I was watching it, every I'd look across, and at about 11 o'clock, I yelled, the down is hanging straight down. We have to shoot right now, And we did, and it was perfect. The Jeff Herron had the explosions go off just right. The elevator went down because there was too much volume to make a big pile, so we had to have an elevator underneath of it that made a false floor to go down, so that the volume of stuff would be like this rather than like this.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, the next day it started raining. And rain.
It's the last time you were.
It was the last time it was ever going to be shot, especially to look like the desert in Arizona during the summertime.
So this is reminding me of something, and I'm curious if live action effect gags on bigatures is a specialty of yours. Because when I remember loading something onto the Naboo set, and you were telling me about the waterfalls on Naboo. That was also a practical effect.
Yeah, it was. Sometimes what would happen is CG was overworked, and not that the model shop wasn't, but sometimes in meetings we'd say, can you come up with a solution, model shop, can you come up with a solution that we could do?
That would take something off their plate.
Yeah, that would take something off their shoulders. So we did first the sugar off velvet that had all these protuberances.
That then they could composite onto.
The ants showed up.
Oh my God, you used sugar. Right.
We had to clean it up and switch to salt. Now, why didn't we think of that in the beginning? I don't know. But anyway, maybe big bags of sugar were easier to get than big bags of salt or something. And so it looked really good, and you shot it at a certain speed. It had that look. But in reality, later on, I think Paul Houston went up to a waterfall, did a bunch of photographs, and then CG did some work. So they did numbers of layers of masks. So it was not, it was maybe they used 10% of model shop salt, and then used real water, and then CG mask with that too, So it was a combination. A number of times that kind of thing has happened where they say, would the model shop come up with a solution, CG's overloaded, and in reality it becomes a combination of the two.
Amazing.
That was the crowd in the pod race arena.
Can you talk about the crowd in the pod race arena? That's one of my favorite practical effects in film.
Yeah. It's downstairs. You were talking to Michael Lynch earlier too, and he was the one who came up with those brilliant ideas with the Q-tips. It was like, well, what are we going to do? And CG isn't going to have enough time.
They weren't going to have enough time to generate thousands of people in the stands watching the pod race.
So he came up with this idea of having, I think, quarter-inch aperture. No, a little bit less than quarter-inch aperture screen.
Yeah,
and it would stretch the stadium like this, and then thousands of Q-tips were mounted in there with the Q-tips that have a wooden bottom, like you get at a doctor's office. Mm-hmm. And then we were going to have a fan underneath oscillating back and forth.
And it makes all the heads.
A little piece of tape, that would cause the things to oscillate different ways. But not only that, but Michael came up with a way, he studied stadiums, and how many people wear red, how many people wear white, how many people are down. What's the percentage of T-shirts and clothing that the people wear? How many light purple, how many black T-shirts are there, or shirts like that? So he came up percentages, and then he came up with a system for dyeing the Q-tips. That he had these paint pots, like that stuff, and he had these he'd put oscillating sanders on these things, and they'd, they'd mull down like this, and then somebody goes like this, and then put them on the drying racks, and they.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but all the different colors, setting up different paint pots of the crowd, and it was brilliant.
It looked so amazing.
It looked, and it was just so charming and wonderful and tickling.
Yes,
it tickles the funny bone. But ultimately, CG did have time, and they did layer after layer over the top, and we were probably maybe 10% of, and they were the 90% kind of a thing.
One of the things I loved when I first got here was noticing that how genial and collaborative and transparent the crew was. We were all just immediately. I was immediately part of a plasma pool, sort of sharing techniques and ideas. And when I was watching Light and Magic, and I was watching about George moving from Van Nuys up here, it struck me that something that hadn't occurred to me was that in assembling the team that came north, he really seemed to prioritize exactly that sort of ethos. That comes from that's what it seems to me like that's sort of what was sought at the beginning, was a really collaborative atmosphere where problems were shared and solved by the group.
With George too, when we first moved up here, so that would have been 78. He doesn't alight for very long any one place. He's got all kinds of things, irons in the fire. And so I prepared, he was going to come by the model shop, so I prepared 8 questions. I wanted to, we're heading and all that stuff. And I thought, well, he's
not going to... running the
model shop. And then he wasn't going to sit here for 8 questions, I don't think. It wasn't going to happen. So I narrowed it down to 2 or 3 or something like that I felt were more important. And I got about an eighth or a third of the way into the first one, and he said, that sounds like your job to me. And I never, ever asked him a question like that ever again.
He just knew what area he wanted to be engaged with and which he didn't.
That's what I hire the people for. And so I don't have to even think about that.
Amazing.
I can come in later on and go, whatever you want. I don't think in the model shop, I don't think he ever did thumbs down.
Yeah. When I left the model shop, 3D printing hadn't still come about for the most part. You could order stereolithography when you needed stuff, but it was still a pretty esoteric technology. Yeah. I'm curious about how what your intersection has been with all of this new model making technology that's shown up in the past 10 or 15 years.
Well, of course, I was there when we did clones and things like that, and Fawn was doing Topeka City or something like that. I think it was. And then they were Brian was doing that long hallway for Camino.
Yeah, that was one of my builds. I did.
And I remember they were using a little bit of laser, not laser, but 3D printing.
Yeah.
And I remember telling Fawn, make sure that every one of those little doodads down the line is not exactly the same. One of them has more wires, or there's something against it, or so it's not. That's incredibly. It's got to be a cold hallway in the first place.
Yeah.
But make it just a little bit more human, I guess.
A little more variegated.
Yeah, more variegated.
Life is very rarely... I like to tell people that in Star Trek, you can have 5 things in a row, but in Star Wars, it's always going to be 3 things and then a space where there's a rust spot and then one more thing that might be different.
A little bit of oil here and there and all that stuff. Yeah, so me personally, you mentioned earlier, I was kind of off in environmental effects. What was in the Tom Cruise movie about
War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds, when the street bulges up and then bulges down and then bulges up again. And I remember sitting in a meeting, and I'd seen the Target logo for Target, the store.
Yeah.
And I just thought, hit this way. And then Jeff Herron could cause the different circles to rise and fall at a different time.
Oh, wow.
And so we could have the mix of peat moss and vermiculite and Fuller's earth and everything, the dirt. And then we would make these big pancakes of walnut shells again, which people say, does everything work with walnut shells, Lorne?
Well, it's better than Fuller's Earth.
Anyway, I had them in all different sizes. So we mixed, carbon black, a little bit of white glue, walnut shells, tiny bit of vermiculite in a big cement mixture. We bought a cement mixer, and we would make these big cookies, and then the lines of the yellow lines we painted on also, and we'd slip it into the set. We'd bring it over in a 5x5 piece of plywood or something like that, and slip it in, and that was the breakthrough, the black top and all that stuff. So that was another one that just kind of, it worked really well.
So I love how much, when I worked with you, how much you made your own tools for specific tasks.
Yeah.
And there's this one picture of you sanding one of the teeth of the worm, the Empire Strikes Back worm. And you're holding something. And I remember asking, what is that thing?
Yeah. It's actually, the teeth are to the back of me, of course.
Right.
And the esophagus, somebody is taking the photograph down. I didn't even know they were there. I was in there, in some light. Yeah. And it's what it is that blue insulating foam. Mm-hmm. And I'm making a new rib for the esophagus. Or the throat of the worm. Yeah. So it was put in, and then we, painted it with something, and then Joe came up with the idea. I guess it was left over from his Hollywood days in Hollywood. We had a big film can, and we had hot glue, with a hot plate, so it was nice and wet. And then he'd take a screw gun with a wire brush, and he'd go like that, and it would just throw the cobwebs all over the inside. Yeah. And so that's what the esophagus is. And it allowed light to come in from the side. And that's why I was making an individual rib. So individual rib, individual rib, individual rib.
Placed in situ to camera.
Yeah. And then with this gossamer, spider webs and everything like that, it formed, as if he had ribs and, that kind of thing. Because where do you come up with light on the inside of a worm?
Right.
A giant worm.
And other questions you never thought you would have to answer.
But that's what I'm doing inside there. When you said that, you were working with that long thing, I immediately thought of another tool. Yeah. And that was, it was the sand set where Amidala falls out of that helicopter type of thing and rolls on the sand and everything. Yeah. And the cameraman, I was off working on something else, and somebody came over and says, Carl or somebody, there's some footprints up there that he can see, but he doesn't want anybody to go up on the set, And I was like, what can you do anything? And we had, just like, at ILM, the drawers of everything behind her, we had stuff. I had a whole drawer of just balloons, everything from the tiniest balloon to condoms to weather balloons to everything. It was just all stuffed into it. That every time I would come across balloons, I would get it and stuff it in there because I knew that they'd come into something. So I blew up a weather balloon, or not really a weather balloon, but it was probably a balloon this big. Yeah. So it didn't have much pressure. And then with a poke pole, which is a really long telescoping fishing pole, I tied that to the end of it, and then it was just a matter of rolling it back and forth across the footprints, and it mellowed out the footprints. And so it could be done without walking on the set from far, far away. But that isn't they aren't like tools you save. The balloon gets thrown away, the poke pole gets
just used once for one task.
And all that stuff. But we had things like and I still have it, the cloud plucker. And it's this device for dressing Dacron clouds for Hook, when Robin Williams flies through the clouds. Those are Dacron on real fine bird netting that they use to capture. You're illegal to have unless you ask permission.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because it's so effective at catching birds.
It's so effective, because it's just hairs, just the tiniest little black hairs. So it's loads and loads of that stretched out. And then from the lift, you could reach out and pull up little tendrils, and it had an alligator clip, which you operated from back here, and you could.
My experience, I tell a lot of people the experience of working on Space Cowboys and doing this dished antenna that I had laser cut, and then I was slump forming into a bowl. And you came by my desk, and you said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm slump forming laser cut acrylic." And you were like, "That's really cool." And then everyone in the shop filed past my desk because you were going around going, "You got to go see this."
You have to go see it. You have to go see it.
What I understood immediately was you were just making sure everyone in the shop knew about a new technique for doing something weird.
Yeah, because it can be used other places.
Yeah.
And all these things, one led to another, led to another, led to another. And, it was, by the time we left here, we were not the same people as when we arrived.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
It was... you might have found this yourself. Sometimes when you're out there in the regular world, you can see solutions to things that other people don't and can't. And sometimes, should I contribute it? Am I just being annoying to people? Am I going to overwhelm them?
Yeah.
Am I going to, that kind of thing? And
there was a special magic to working on something super concentratedly and then having a building full of people who all understood exactly what you were doing.
Yeah.
That was remarkable because everyone might contribute. Someone walks through and goes, "Oh, that needs a little booger there," and you're like, "They're totally right."
Yeah. It was a real pleasure. I sometimes say that, if you have a job in which 5 or 10% of it you're in the zone, you're just it's like somebody's like, Adam, are you? Well, you have to be at a meeting in a while. Is there a voice? Well, if 5 or 10% of the time, if you can do that, you're a very lucky person.
I agree.
And around here, sometimes I think, well, is it 80% or 75% or 90% or what it was? There was an awful lot of time that was that zone kind of thing, even though. A lot of them were very arduous. You'd go home and want to take a shower. From foam dust, from the urethane dust that you'd been sanding, or whatever it is. We all had this thing of being at home and watching television and with your friend and scratching your head, and then it comes down in your eyebrows and into your eyes, and you're blink, 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 and.
Or you go out to dinner and you've washed your hands and your face, but you've only made a clean spot here, and everything else here is you're totally filthy.
I one time when it was previous to Star Wars, I carved the Big Mayor McCheese for McDonald's Land and the Hamburglar.
Yeah.
So I could carve these giant blocks with a reciprocating saw and big Japanese saws and machetes. So that happened years and years ago. The early 70s. So it was green foam that we're working with, which is awful foam.
Like plant foam, the super...
Yeah, the rear tries and everything. They developed better foams later. But anyway, I went to the bank one day, and I had a check, and the teller, she goes, "Oh, it feels funny."
It's covered with...
And the static electricity had put a little layer of the green foam everywhere.
Amazing.
And then it went to the counter.
Yeah.
She set the check down. So after everything got done, I turn around to go back, and there's these negative footprints of me on the carpet in the bank,
leaving your stuff.
Yeah, the static electricity had just drawn the foam down, and so it was a clear footprint with the foam. Green foam at the side.
I get the sense that you feel really lucky to have been able to play in this sandbox.
I mean, sometimes when you think, you're not thinking of Barbra Streisand, but then you say, "I think I'm the luckiest person in the world." Oh, damn it! Why did I say it some other way?
Yeah, like I said, I kept on referring to my job as "tomorrow I get to."
No, I did. I used to tell some of the model makers, says if you don't really care for what you're doing right now, just wait a week and you'll be doing something else that will be more exciting and more challenging and all that kind of stuff. Because there's always got to be different grades of jobs.
Yeah,
you got to have every degree of Indian in chief at your disposal.
And you have to be able to kind of do all those parts of the jobs. Like I love to tell young people, like, look, when you're going to be doing drudgery and tedium 90% of the time with the goal that maybe 5 to 10% you get to do something cool.
Yeah.
And you can increase that percentage as you go, but it's just that. And you've got to be good at the drudgery to embrace it.
Yeah, that's true. And like my mother used to, she'd say like, how do you have the patience to do that? Just you've been doing that for 5 hours. The repetitive thing that you need to get to what you really want to do.
Yep.
And it kind of separates the sheep from the goats.
It certainly does.
The people that can stick at something, do the Gordian's knot. No, I'll just untie it. No, I won't sword.
The two people I saw who didn't last here very long were both rejected tedium. They were like, I don't want to do this anymore. And they were just told, well, then go do that somewhere else.
Go somewhere else.
Lorne, I really appreciate you telling me these stories, man.
Absolutely, Adam. It's always a pleasure.
It really is.
And it's like talking about this stuff is like almost like the little hairs on your neck. It's like thousands and thousands of memories to relive, and obviously both of us have very good memories.
Yeah.